Uh, you know, I'm just going to say some source books, some books see much more preview or use in the aspect of reading enjoyment from of us than others. I'm speaking from my own case, okay, so maybe it doesn't work that way for you. Maybe it doesn't. Okay, I'm fine with that. But for decades, I have had, and I'm trying to find a delicate way to put this, uh, reading material in in my lieu that some of my best thinking's done when I'm taking my daily constitutional. And you're not trying to push yourself and rush it, or you just sit there and you take the moment in time. You're isolated, the door's closed, you got yourself to do what you got to do. But back in the day, we didn't take our Game Boys and video games and cell phones in with us. I always find that a bit crude. Find out somebody's on the John while they're talking to you on the cell phone. Really? Yeah, maybe you don't have to tell me. I'm not going to know, but there's just something strange about that, right? On the other hand, sitting there with a good book and reading this or that or the newspaper, that's different, right? So on my little shelf for the longest time, there was two books that almost always was there unless I needed them for something else. And this was one of them, Moria. The other one was, oddly enough, the Death Star source book for West End Games version of Star Wars. Right, and I read both of these quite extensively. So one of the reasons I love Moria, and this is one of the first early issue source books for the game system for Merp. This was 1984, so this was in that first salvo of book material that come out when they launched the game system, and they had plans to reintroduce it under the 2.0 version, the second coming of the version, but never did, to my knowledge. Back then, nobody called them 2.3.4.5.0. That's a computer jargon thing, and while it still works, you still kind of go, yeah, okay, whatever. And first off, as a player, as a GM, I've always been, I don't want to say I'm fascinated, and that's not true. I don't want to say I'm fascinated with the concept of the dwarves. I just have had a lot of players who prefer the Dwarven character. And part because in their mind they're pretty simplistic to play. They're very two-dimensional, which I've discovered is not true at all. If you really go into the depth of reading about the race, that they actually have a lot of depth and color to them. Over the years, I've seen some diversions from the standard, atypical dwarf. In novels and perspective, there's a would-be druid dwarf in some of the Forgotten Realms books that defies all expectations. And Pickle, I think is the name, even dyes his beard green and talks like a child in some aspects. But then there's another one who's so prissy, and I don't want to use that word in derogatory or means that's going to annoy or upset somebody. But what was that? Oh, I've got some sort of light thing going on here. I don't know. Okay. The lighting here in the RV is not so hot. It's also a gloomy day out there. It's kind of partly cloudy. It's early in the morning, which is about the best time for me to do these things unless I'm between jobs at work. And it's muggy outside for September. Mid-September in Iowa, it is like June out here. Not necessarily a good thing. I'm going to fire the generator up here sometime later today and run the AC in this thing because I hate sweating and it's my day off. Gosh darn it. But Moria. And actually, I almost need to do a two-part section on this book because there's so much stuff, so much depth and detail. Well, they do an awesome job in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, both in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, when they discuss uh, the fighting between the Dwarven clans and the orcs. Uh, we see significant interior shots of Moria, Chasm, when the 12 or the 9 companions have to go through. Gandalf leads them into the mines of Moria, and they spend 3 days crossing under the mountains to get to the other side. And we see the grandeur and the scale of this place. It is mind-boggling. And in no, I'm not saying that there aren't other versions of this in other game systems, because I'm sure they are. You can't not have something like Moria and not have somebody clone it. It just is what it is. The rich material history. You could have an entire campaign set just in Moria and run in here. Literally, probably could run a couple-year campaign and never set foot outside of Moria. If you're running a Dwarven-based campaign, I don't know if you've ever tried to do that. I have, and it can be a challenge. Especially if you got some people who are really in tune to their dwarvish side, and they're just as stubborn in real life as they are as a character, and can make for some interesting or frustrating gameplay from the GM's perspective. But as typical, we've got the guidelines, we've got our abbreviations and definitions, and got the instructions on adapting this module to your campaign. This module is designed for use in multiple major fantasy role-playing game systems, since the various FRP rules have their own particular approaches to combat, spells, character generation, and development. Certain common descriptive terms have been selected for individual outlines of places, people, creatures, and things. Unfortunately, statistical data such as bonuses and character stats differ widely between systems. After all, they are key to specific game mechanics. ICE has chosen to use the percentile or the D100 terms as a base, since conversion to D20, D18, and D10 can be achieved with relative ease. Note, see section 1.32 below for a handy conversion chart. Player character and NPC characteristics and stats are also detailed for one particular manner. Again, simplicity and consistency have been emphasized, and the conversion to your game system should be relatively painless. Keep in mind that fantasy role-playing is by nature a creative experience, and the individual GM or player should feel free to incorporate his or her own ideas into their game. Following the steps may be helpful when beginning to explore the region here described. We all know that montage, and I've said it repeatedly. This is why, while I liked the Rollmaster system, the D100 system, I actually do, and I had a few groups over the years that could roll with the rules. The MERP set of rule books was very generic, and that was in part because Iron Crown Enterprises' main bread and butter was Rollmaster and all this associated core books. So it made sense to them not to duplicate those as a MERP. And under the MERP logo, why dabble twice? They gave you the rulebook for the MERP system, and then implied and hinted and urged and cajoled you to go and craft these Rollmaster stuff, arms law, spell law, so on and so forth, because it gave you everything that the MERP core book is in this thing, especially the magic. Magic in Lord of the Rings is very subtle and very thin, and that's because it was in the books. I've said that over and over again. I also said that it was much easier for me, especially when I'm dealing with players who were quite familiar with Dungeons & Dragons and the D20 system, just to overlay the D&D rules and all that stuff. Here's my campaign world. MERP is the world, but the mechanics are D&D. It just was simpler, right? Once again, the lazy GM mindset, right? Going down. Got to change my moniker. It just seems to work better. Converting statistics. I'm not going to go into the details on that sort of stuff, but it's there. Converting spells and spell lists, note on levels, leveling your characters, an introduction to Moria. I mean, I could sit here and just read this to you, but excuse the yawn. Can't help it. the land, the climate, the land. Moria is a gigantic complex carved out of mirrored caves lying beneath three greatest peaks in central Misty Mountains. Vast halls and passages stretch within the width and range of like the Red Horde Pass and the surface above, serve to link the ancient regions of Aragon and Lorem. I have used Moria probably more times than any other supplement or source book I have in any of my game systems. Whenever I needed to have a vast underground complex or labyrinth for an adventure, Moria was my go-to because I could slice sections of this book out and easily convert it to what I needed to fit, and I didn't have to go to great depth. Even when I created my own from scratch, I still use this heavily. I use this book heavily as source book material for my own construction because I wanted to remember or lay out things so it was different a little bit from everything else. I still could go back here and I could tap into the mechanics here or the geography, the layout, and build on it, because it's one thing to create a vast underground city is a huge undertaking, and to create one from scratch, it's boggling just how much detail and work you have to go into. And if nothing else, the formula or the blueprint that's in here, if you look at it, it's pretty obvious of how to go about doing that. You have your overall view, and then you break it down. And you say, okay, the atypical intersection, the atypical dwelling, the atypical inn that you're going to encounter. And there's something to be said about that, because specifically with dwarves, because the dwarves are very analytical when it comes to this sort of thing. It's utilitarian. The guard room works. This is a basic design. Why have 5,000 unique different individual locations? We can carbon copy and just work from the same set of blueprints. Now, we'll vary the mechanics, the defense systems, that kind of stuff enough that the bad guys will have trouble with it. But, if we're going to build a wayside inn in a tunnel system, well, why divert? Why have 100 different versions of that? The elves are different. The elves were doing things from an aesthetic perspective as well as defense. They had, both the elves and the dwarf have gobs and gobs of time to work on things, but the dwarven sensibilities and aesthetics are quite different from elves. That's why the elves look like their stuff's more organic, more flowing, more diverse, because each is an individual work of art and is a representation of the crafter and the creator. Whereas in the dwarves, each one is an individual work of art, yet they all have the same or similar foundations in mathematics and common sense approaches to things. So the dwarves stuff have a tendency to look quite similar to each other in that aspect, which is better for us as a GM, because then we don't have to come up with 100 different locations. We could come up with a half dozen and then juggle them around as we need them, right? The plant life. One of the things I like, and I repeatedly say that I like about the Merp Rollmaster, is its advanced use of organics and the depth. So we got things like, the Limsang as an example. Limsang or Astor, depending who you talk to. The elves call the great meal mushroom the way thrown, for it grows to heights of 2 feet, supports a crown 1 to 3 feet in diameter, although most of its surface is hard. Its top is covered with a soft purple fur, which is renowned for its food value. A pound of Limsang can feed a man for a week. Given its nourishing nature, the tails associated with the enchanted limbus or whey bread. So, there's just one sampling of the selection of stuff here. And those things are translatable to other game systems or other parts of the Lord of the Rings, the Merp. So, you got your cave bear, your cavern wing, which is some variant of a vampire bat, I'm guessing. Aquatics, fish. Then we got our brief history. Oh, the history of the dwarves. I don't know. They do a great job of giving you the history of the Elvish people, but nowhere do they go into the depth and level of detail than they do with the founding of the dwarves and their struggles. And it's much more documented. Now, I think in part that might be because most of the Elvish, we're talking the Lord of the Rings here in Middle Earth, most of your Elvish stuff predates the game material significantly. The lion's share of their saga takes place in the First Age, and the Shermillion is your guidebook for that. So, because none of our game supplements are, we don't have the Belgariad, had Iron Crown Enterprises kept rolling along with this and maintained their grip on the rights to the system and had the market bore it out, they may well have expanded into other sections of the history of Middle Earth. That's one of the advantages of having such a well in-depth created world to work from. But we don't have we do have some. There are some game supplements, and we'll get to those that like Rivendell touches vaguely on it, but it doesn't do any justice. The one with Ulstnadaldale, I can't pronounce it, Holland, that goes into better depth on it. But nowhere do you get the level. In Lord of the Rings, it's Moria. If you really want to know why the dwarves are the way they are, their history and their mindset, this is the go-to reference for all of that. It talks about a brief history, but the brief history runs on for 5 damn pages. So it shows you how 5 pages of a very in-depth history, right? So, and that's a brief overview in their view. The founding of Khazad-dûm, the building of the Durin's mansion, the dwarves of Belgust and Algarad, the original strife between the dwarves of the Cinder, the flight to Khazad-dûm, the golden years of the Second Age, discovery of Mithril, the origin of the name Moria, the Lord of Gifts and the Rings of Power, the gift of Durin's Ring, the war and the naming of Moria, the flight of the dwarves. Let me go back for a minute. Like I said, I'm already running into, we're going to have to do 2 installments of this. I'm sorry. I've read this, and they do an incredible job in both on YouTube and in Peter Jackson's renditions of The Hobbit. Now, there's a scene where Thorin's grandfather is bedecked in gold and jewels in the Lonely Mountain, and it's the Arkenstone that he's lusting after. But what they don't imply is, and they leave it out in the books, Gandalf recovers the first Dwarven ring that Sauron and the elves co-created from Thorin's father. And Thorin, I don't remember if Thorin wore it or not, but they kind of glazed over it in the movies. The truth of the Horde at the Lonely Mountain, in part, was because of Thrain, is it Thrain? I can't keep track of the names. Thorin's grandfather was so obsessed with the collection of wealth, so obsessed, he even was in the process of creating a golden statue of monolithic proportions to himself. And in part, it's because of the twisted power of the Dwarven ring and what it did to his psyche. It did not control him in the way that the Lord of the Rings wanted it to. Sauron could not directly influence the dwarves, because the dwarves are resistant to that sort of stuff. They will not be dominated by will of force. That is part of their creation. That's what makes them different from the elves, right? The elves can be dominated and that's corrupted. This is how the orcs and the goblins came about, according to the historical canon of Lord of the Rings. The dwarves have no counterpart. There are no corrupted version of orcish dwarves. They don't exist, and in part because the dwarves just aren't designed or built that way. Their creator created them that way, and that makes them unique in the aspect. There's plenty of twisted and perverted humans, and we even see a twisted, perverted hobbit in Gollum. But you'll never find one of the dwarves. None. So That's the power of the ring and how it affected himself. So, like I said, we're going into the War of the Zog and the Orcs, Moria in the later years, the loss of the ring, Thorn's quest to the Thorn the Second's quest to Erebor, Balin return to Moria at the end of the Third Age. Then we even break it down even further to give you more information. And from a perspective of a game player, a game master, if you wanted to set you could pick any one of these time periods. If you want to have a campaign with based off of dwarves, booyah! There is huge amounts of material to work from here. And the best part about it is because of the nature of the Dwarven system, there's philosophy and science, you can pick any one of these time areas, and all the material, for the most part, can be folded into it with a relative ease. Relative ease. I have run a number of game campaigns for Dwarven based, where everybody played dwarves. It is a challenge and a unique one. It's different. I have not had as much success in running 100% Elvish campaigns. Dwarves different. Okay, so like I said, this is just too big of a source book with too much material to cover in one installment. So if you bear with me, we'll switch over and come back with part two. Hopefully we won't need part three.